You didn't choose to be alone, but one by one, they vanished. The friends who once swore they'd stay, gone. The love that felt eternal, cold silence, and now it's just you, staring at the ceiling at 2 a.m., asking, why me? But what if I told you? Their exit wasn't abandonment, it was divine removal. Because what's coming next in your life, they weren't meant to survive it with you. Stay with me, chosen one. You're about to learn the real reason heaven had to break your heart, to unlock your power. It didn't happen all at once. That's the strangest part. You didn't wake up to an empty room, or a phone with 0 contacts, or a calendar that suddenly held no names. No, it was slow, almost invisible. A silent unraveling that began long before you noticed. At first, it was subtle. A friend who stopped replying as quickly. A relative who didn't check in like they used to. A conversation that used to flow, like water now felt, forced, dry, heavy. And then, one day, you looked around and realized, they're all gone, maybe not physically. Some are still alive, still posting, still smiling in photos with people who aren't you. But emotionally, spiritually, they're ghosts in your life, shadows of who they used to be, echoes of who you thought they'd remain. You thought you did something wrong. Maybe you were too distant. Maybe you were too honest, too weird, too spiritual, too intense. But here's the truth. Most people won't say out loud. When you're chosen, truly chosen, loss isn't just a possibility. It's a pattern, because you carry something inside you that others don't understand. And what people don't understand, they back away from. Sometimes gently, sometimes violently, but either way you're left standing in silence, wondering why everyone you loved is no longer there. But listen closely. This pain, this loneliness, it's not punishment, it's preparation. Heaven doesn't strip your life bare because you're cursed. It does so because you're being positioned. You weren't meant to be weighed down by attachments that can't endure the intensity of your calling. You weren't meant to carry people into places they weren't built to survive. You're not alone because you're broken. You're alone because you're becoming. Do you remember the last conversation you had with that one person, the one who felt like home? The words were simple. Maybe it was over nothing, a misunderstanding, an argument that shouldn't have escalated. But the energy underneath it was massive, like the universe was drawing a sharp line in the sand. And it left you with questions. So many questions. Why now? Why them? Why this way? Because timing is everything for a chosen one, and God doesn't allow exits that would delay your elevation. That person didn't betray you, they fulfilled their role. Their absence carved space. For your next level, you had to be emptied, so you could be filled with power. Let me ask you something personal. Have you ever noticed how your energy changes when you're truly alone? When the distractions fall away? When there's no one left to impress? When the performance ends and it's just you, raw and honest, sitting in your silence? There's a clarity that begins to rise. It's terrifying at first. The stillness is deafening, the grief is sharp. But under all that, there's power. You start to see your gifts for what they are. You start to recognize your discernment, not as paranoia, but as divine radar. You start to feel something ancient stirring within you, a memory, a knowing, a glimpse of the real you. The one buried beneath all the noise, all the people-pleasing, all the emotional chaos of relationships that were never built to last. And in that space, you begin to understand Your loneliness isn't emptiness. It's consecration. You've been set apart. Let the world call it abandonment. Let others call it isolation. But in the spiritual realm, you're in the wilderness, the very place every chosen one must walk through. Moses was alone before the call. David was in the fields when he was anointed. Even Jesus withdrew to the desert, alone before his greatest works began. This pattern isn't new. It's sacred. And if you're living it now, you are not forgotten. You are favored. But favored doesn't always feel good, does it? It feels like crying yourself to sleep. It feels like checking your phone and seeing no messages. It feels like watching other people find love, while you question if you'll ever feel that connection again. And yet, you wake up the next day, stronger, wiser, sharper. You begin to realize you're hearing from God. More clearly, you're dreaming deeper. You're seeing through lies faster. That's not a coincidence. That's transformation. See, the loss wasn't just about other people. It was about you. It was about stripping away who you thought you were supposed to be, so the truth of who you actually are could emerge. And the truth is this: you are not weak. You are not too much. You are not unlovable. You are divine. Strategy in human form. You are purpose wrapped in skin. You are chosen, not just to shine, but to withstand. Because let's be honest, the attacks were real. The heartbreaks were brutal. You've had moments where you didn't know if you'd survive another wave of loss, but you did. You're still here, and that means the assignment on your life is still in motion. The ones who left, they weren't bad people. They just couldn't walk this next stretch with you. Their energy wasn't calibrated for your frequency anymore. And if they had stayed, they would have limited you. They would have questioned your visions. They would have doubted your breakthroughs. They would have pulled you back down when you were meant to rise. So the separation, it wasn't a curse. It was divine protection. You were being shielded from delay, distraction, and destruction. And yes, it still hurts. But in that pain is the proof that your heart still feels, still loves, still hopes. And that means your calling hasn't hardened you. It's refined you. You still believe in love. You still crave connection. But now, you know your worth. Now you won't settle for half commitments, shallow bonds, or relationships that drain your light. Now, you're becoming the version of you that your future was waiting for. The version that can lead. The version that can heal. The version that can no longer be manipulated, gaslit, or abandoned because you finally know who you are. Not everyone will clap for that version. Not everyone will return. But those who do, those who show up now in your rawness, your truth, your spiritual power, those are your tribe, and they're coming. But until then, walk tall in your solitude, because this loneliness, it's sacred, and it's the doorway to everything you were born to become. The night is always darkest before something sacred shifts. You know this now not as a saying, but as something etched into your bones. You've lived it. The midnight hours where the silence feels unbearable, where the memories come like crashing waves, and all you can do is sit in the wreckage of what used to be. The grief doesn't speak loudly anymore. It whispers. It's not just about the people you lost. It's the dreams attached to them. The future you thought you'd share. The holidays you envisioned. The laughter, the inside jokes, the simple routines. The way you'd lean on them when the world felt too heavy. And now it's just you, alone in a life you didn't expect. But let me remind you of something the world rarely honors. There is divine intelligence in your loneliness. You are not a mistake wandering through silence. You are a chosen soul being realigned. See, when you lose loved ones, whether through death, betrayal, distance, or simply the silent unraveling of connection, it opens a doorway most people never walk through. It's the door to spiritual maturity, and no, it's not glamorous. It doesn't come with applause or instant healing. It doesn't feel noble. It feels like heartbreak. It feels like sitting at a table with too many chairs. It feels like hearing a song that used to belong to someone and realizing they no longer do. But here's what no one tells you. When you're chosen, grief becomes a teacher, not just an emotion. It teaches you what you're made of. It teaches you how deep your heart goes. It teaches you who you are without the attachments. And that's when your identity starts getting purified. Because up until now, you may have thought you were the friend, the partner, the sibling, the child, the role you played in someone else's life. But that was only a part of you, not the core now. Without those mirrors reflecting versions of you back, you're forced to confront yourself in a new way, a raw way, a sacred way. And what you find there is power. Stillness reveals your anointing. It's in the quiet that you start hearing again, not just with your ears, with your spirit. Suddenly, old patterns become visible. You see how much you tolerated just to keep peace, how many times you silenced your intuition to preserve connection, how often you dimmed your light to avoid outshining others who weren't ready to rise with you. And now there's no one left to lie to, no one to perform for, just you and truth. And that truth is electric. Painful, yes, but freeing, because it tells you what you always suspected. You were never meant to stay small, just to keep people comfortable. Your isolation is evidence that you've outgrown the old spiritual ecosystem. You don't belong where you were, not because you're better, but because you're becoming, and becoming requires separation. It's the wilderness moment again, just like the prophets, just like the healers, just like every soul who was ever called higher. They all had to go alone first. They all had to bury versions of themselves. They all had to grieve people who couldn't cross over into their destiny. And so must you. You thought they would be with you forever. You thought loyalty was enough to carry the weight of your journey. But the truth is, some people were only assigned to chapters, not your whole book. And when that chapter closes, it feels like the world ends. But in reality, the next one is begging to be written. Can I tell you something sacred? Many of the people you lost were not taken from you. They were removed for you, because you wouldn't have let go on your own. You would have held on out of love, out of history, out of hope. And that love is real. It mattered. But your calling matters more. God saw what was coming. God saw who couldn't handle your glow dash up, who would sabotage it out of jealousy, who would gossip about your journey instead of pray for it, who would attach to your light but never invest in your healing. So, God severed it, and yes, it hurt, but it saved you, because now you're no longer dragging people who were never meant to run with you. You're no longer feeding souls who only came to take. And slowly, you're remembering who you are when you're not surviving someone else's storm. This is your sacred reintroduction. You in your wholeness, you in your solitude, you in your spiritual strength. And don't get it twisted. This isn't the end of love for you. It's the beginning of real love, because the next people who come into your life, they won't need to be convinced of your worth. They won't shrink in your presence. They won't compete with your growth. They'll recognize your scars and still want to build. They'll speak the same spiritual language. They'll honor your boundaries, not bulldoze them, because you've changed and you're attracting differently now. But before that love can arrive, you must honor the space you're in. Don't rush out of your loneliness. Don't try to fix it with noise, people, or temporary highs. Sit in it. Learn from it. Let it stretch you, because this is the sacred fire, the furnace where the old you melts, and the gold within you rises. And when you emerge, and you will, you won't even recognize yourself. You'll walk differently, speak differently, love differently, because you'll know you didn't just survive grief, you transcended it, and that version of you, that's the one the world has been waiting to meet. At first, you begged for the silence to end. The nights were too long, the memories too loud. You replayed every conversation, every goodbye, every moment you wished you could rewind. It wasn't just grief, it was a haunting, an echo chamber of what was, what should have been, and what never will be again. But over time, something strange happened. You stopped waiting for the phone to ring. You stopped checking old messages, stopped walking into rooms expecting a familiar voice. Not because you stopped loving them, but because your spirit knew it was time to return to yourself. There's a grief that breaks you, and then there's a grief that builds you. You've walked through both. One tore you down left. You crumbled in pieces so small you didn't think you'd ever be whole again. But the other, it made you reconstruct yourself from a deeper blueprint. One the world had never seen. One even you had forgotten. See, the path of the chosen is paved in sacred losses. You don't just lose people, you lose versions of yourself with them. The you that laughed a little louder because they were around. The you that felt safe because they made the world less cold. The you that believed in forever until forever ended too soon. And that's why it hurts more for you than for others, because you don't grieve on the surface. You grieve spiritually. Your soul gets entangled in every connection. You love past logic. You attach with your essence. So when people leave, they don't just exit your life, they leave fingerprints on your destiny. But here's what makes you different. You don't stay shattered. You gather the fragments with trembling hands and rebuild yourself quietly in the dark. No one sees it. No one applauds it. But you do it anyway, because something deep in your bones whispers, this pain is not your end. It's your initiation. You were never meant to stay in the cocoon, and pain, it cracks the shell. Every chosen one reaches this moment. The point where isolation becomes a sanctuary, not a sentence, where tears are no longer signs of weakness, but holy water washing away illusions. You start to see your life from above, like watching an old film in slow motion. The betrayals no longer sting, they teach. The endings no longer break you, they cleanse. The absences no longer feel cruel, they feel surgical, like divine removals for your healing, and it clicks. They didn't leave because you were unworthy. They left because your spirit was evolving beyond what their energy could hold. You were outgrowing the rooms you once felt safe in, outgrowing the conversations that once felt comforting, outgrowing the dynamics where you had to shrink just to stay. Loss didn't just happen to you, it happened for you, to awaken you, to elevate you, to extract you from environments too small for your future. Because what dwells inside you is not ordinary. You carry frequencies that disrupt. Your presence activates unspoken truths in others. Your words trigger awakenings even when you don't mean to. And for some people, That's terrifying. Not because you did something wrong, but because your light exposed what they weren't ready to face. And so, they pulled away, or life pulled them out, or spirit whispered, "This season is done." And you were left wondering, why does everyone I love leave? But now, you're starting to understand. They didn't leave because you're unlovable. They left because your next chapter required solitude. And solitude isn't punishment, it's preparation. Because something greater is forming inside you now. Not just wisdom, not just resilience, but spiritual clarity. The kind that cuts through illusions like a blade. The kind that no longer tolerates half-love, fake loyalty, or temporary bonds. You're learning to love yourself in your entirety, not just in relation to others. You're remembering that your existence has meaning, even when no one claps for it, even when no one's around to witness it, even when the ones you wanted beside you are gone. And as this truth settles in, the loneliness becomes quieter, not because the ache vanishes, but because it starts making sense. You realize that every great soul had to walk this valley. Moses in the wilderness, David in the cave, Jesus in Get, Isma, Elijah under the tree asking God to take his life. All of them chosen, all of them alone for a season. Because to carry that level of divine assignment, you must be stripped of human dependency, so that when you rise, and you will, you're not rising as someone searching for validation. You're rising as someone who knows where their power comes from. This season, it's teaching you how to stand without crutches, how to pray without performance, how to feel without fleeing. And slowly, you're becoming unshakable. You still miss them. Of course you do. But you no longer believe their absence is the end of your story. In fact, their absence has made room for new soul alignments, room for divine appointments, room for relationships rooted in truth, not trauma bonding, because you're no longer operating from scarcity. You're no longer begging for crumbs just to feel connected. You're no longer tolerating proximity over purpose. You're learning that being alone doesn't mean you're unloved. It means you're unavailable for anything less than what honors your spirit, and that is sacred. You've walked through fire and didn't burn. You lost people you thought you'd never live without and still breathe. You held your own heart when it felt like no one else could, and now you're standing not because the grief is gone, but because grace has filled the cracks. You're not the same person who began this journey. You're wiser, quieter, stronger, and though your arms are emptier, your soul is fuller, because you've met yourself in the ashes, and what you found there was never meant to be buried. There comes a moment, subtle, quiet, like the soft closing of a door, when you realize you've changed. You're not waiting anymore, not waiting for them to return, not waiting for someone to come fill the silence, not even waiting for the pain to disappear, because somewhere along the path, the pain stopped being your enemy. It became your teacher. And this is where the story of the chosen ones deepens, not in the moments of triumph, but in the shadows, where they learn to sit with what cannot be undone. This is where you are now, not the version of you that still clings, begs, or resists, but the version of you that can finally whisper, "They're gone, and I'm still here." That truth lands like a storm and a stillness at the same time. It's brutal, but cleansing, painful, but freeing. Because when you've loved deeply and lost violently, there is no going back to who you were before. Grief remakes you. It peels away the surface-level desires, It strips the noise. It detaches you from shallow needs and empty distractions. You used to long for noise, crowds, constant reassurance. Now you crave stillness, a single breath of peace, a real connection that doesn't require masks. You used to fear being alone. Now you know it's in your solitude that spirit speaks the loudest. And this transformation, it was never meant to be public. This was a sacred dismantling, one only God could witness fully. Because had people seen the nights you screamed into pillows, or the mornings you couldn't get out of bed, or the days you walked around smiling with a storm inside your chest, they would have called it weakness. But you now know what it really was. Rebirth. You were being emptied so you could be filled. Not with noise, not with people, not with another distraction, but with the real you. The version of you that doesn't perform. The version that doesn't chase. The version that remembers. Your worth was never attached to who stayed. Let that settle in, because for so long, you measured your value by who validated you, who loved you back, who held space for your heart. But here's the holy truth. The ones who left did not take your value with them. They just made space for the version of you who no longer needs to be chosen, because you already are. Chosen by spirit, chosen by purpose, chosen by a divine design too deep for casual relationships. And that's why your life looks different. It's not because you're cursed, it's because you've been called higher. And when you're called higher, you lose access to what once sustained you. You lose the comfort of codependency. You lose the false safety of shallow attachments. You lose the illusion that someone else can carry what was always yours to carry. You are being matured spiritually, emotionally, energetically. The things that once broke you, they now reveal you. The things that once terrified you now strengthen you. You've become so acquainted with grief that it no longer startles you. It knocks, and you let it in. You sit with it. You don't run, because you've learned that what grief really does is show you what mattered, and in a strange, sacred way, it honors your love. You're not broken because you miss them. You're human because you miss them. You're chosen because you continue to grow. Even with that ache in your chest, most people collapse under that kind of pain. They shut down, they harden, they pretend they don't care, but not you. You softened, you stayed open, you let loss carve wisdom into your bones, and now you walk through the world differently, more present, more aware, more discerning. You see things others miss. You feel the energy in a room before a word is spoken. You know when a soul is hurting behind a smile. You hear what's not being said. And that sensitivity, that intuition, it came from your initiation in the dark. Because pain didn't just wound you, it trained you. You didn't just survive the fire, you absorbed its lessons. And now you carry that fire in your eyes. That's why people look at you differently now. They sense something. They don't know what you've endured, but they feel the strength in your silence. They feel the depth in your gaze. They feel the sacred rage in your calm, because you've wrestled angels in the night. You've cried out to a God you weren't sure was listening. You've died 1,000 small deaths and still chose to rise. And now you've become a mirror. People see themselves when they look at you, the real them, the unhealed them, the parts they hide. That's why some can't handle being around you anymore. You don't trigger their wounds, you expose them, and so they distance themselves, or ghost you, or label you too much. But here's what they don't realize. Your presence is not rejection, it's revelation. You're a walking invitation to depth, and not everyone is ready for that, so they leave, or life removes them, or your spirit outgrows them. And yes, it still stings, but it doesn't shatter you anymore, because now you know it's not a loss. It's alignment. You're not being abandoned, you're being positioned for connections that match your truth, friendships that don't flinch at your fire, love that sees your scars and still says, I choose you. And until that alignment arrives fully, Spirit is keeping you alone, not to punish you, but to protect you, because there's nothing more dangerous than a half-healed, chosen one linking with another soul, not ready to walk beside them. You're too sacred for shallow, too awakened for asleep, too called to be caged. So let this solitude continue, its holy work. Let it strip what was never truly yours. Let it reveal what your soul has always known, that your path was never meant to be crowded, that the real ones will find you, not because you search, but because you shine. And when they arrive, they won't try to fill the void. They'll recognize the temple that's been built inside of you. The temple forged in tears, in prayer, in silence, in grief. And they'll kneel with reverence, not because you're perfect, but because they see the spirit in you. It's quiet now, not the kind of quiet that haunts you. That was the old kind, the one that echoed with memories and regrets, the one that made you feel like you were trapped inside an invisible prison with only the ghost of who you used to be. No, this quiet is different. It's alive, sacred. It doesn't mock you anymore. It doesn't remind you of what you lost. Instead, it holds you, wraps around you like a knowing presence, like God Himself sat down beside you and said, I'm still here. This is what healing sounds like. It's not loud, it's not fast, it's not always joyful. Sometimes it's a slow exhale after months of survival. Sometimes it's standing in your kitchen and realizing you're no longer pretending to be okay. You actually are, sometimes. It's catching your reflection in the mirror and seeing someone wiser, deeper, more rooted, even if their eyes still carry traces of sadness. This is the secret no one talks about on the path of the chosen. You don't wake up one day suddenly healed. You wake up and you just don't cry anymore. You wake up and the ache is still there, but it's not running the show. You wake up and you feel free to smile again, not because you forgot them, but because you finally forgave yourself for surviving. You've carried survivor's guilt, haven't you? You kept asking, why them? Why not me? You replayed the what-ifs. You punished yourself in invisible ways, pushing love away, sabotaging joy, staying small so no one could ever be ripped away from you again. But that's not how chosen ones are meant to live. You weren't meant to dim to protect others. You weren't meant to shrink to feel safe. You weren't meant to hide behind grief as your identity. Yes, you've been through hell. Yes, you've lost more than words could ever express. But no, your story isn't over. It's just getting honest, because here's the divine truth. God did not abandon you, even in the silence, even when the prayers went unanswered, even when you cursed the sky with tears in your eyes. You were never alone. Spirit was there, not just watching, but weeping with you. Every night you collapsed. Every time your knees hit the floor, you weren't breaking alone. Heaven was breaking with you, and now you've crossed through something sacred. You've stepped out of survival mode and into awareness. You're no longer begging for your old life back. You're no longer waiting for someone to come fix what was broken. You've become the one you were always searching for. Let that land, you. Thee, become the one who listens when no one else does, the one who sees what others overlook, the one who carries light into dark rooms, even if your own heart still trembles. You thought the loss would destroy you, but instead, it revealed you. It peeled away the layers of identity you were never meant to carry. It dismantled the performance. It shattered the illusion that you needed anyone else's permission to be whole. Yes, you're still healing, but now your healing doesn't come from escape. It comes from embodiment. You've stopped running from your story. You've stopped numbing your emotions. You've stopped hiding your sensitivity like it was a curse. And that's what makes you dangerous in the spirit realm now, because the enemy can't manipulate someone who is no longer afraid to feel. Pain no longer controls you. Loss no longer defines you. Silence no longer scares you. You've tasted solitude and found God in it, and now you've outgrown the traps. The trap of needing constant connection, the trap of waiting for closure, the trap of overexploiting your depth to shallow souls. You don't do that anymore. You're not begging to be seen. You are seen by the one who matters most. You're not explaining your calling. You're living it quietly, consistently, with power that no one can touch. You're not chasing what left. You're blessing it, letting it go with peace, even if your heart still trembles a bit when you think of them. Because you've learned what's meant for you won't require you to lose yourself to keep it. Read that again. And now, here you stand, not in the ashes, but on them. You've built something new, a life that doesn't ignore the pain, but carries it with reverence. A love for yourself that doesn't need to be validated. A connection to the divine that no one can interrupt. You are the proof that grief doesn't end your life. It just ends the illusion that life had to look a certain way. You're living proof that even when everything falls apart, something holy rises. The way you walk now, slower, softer, more present, it's different. Not because you're fragile, but because you're sacred. You've earned the silence. You've earned the peace. You've earned the right to say no to anything that threatens your healing. So here's your permission. If you need it, you can stop grieving the past version of yourself. She was never meant to survive everything you've been through. He was never equipped for this level of transformation. You're not them anymore. And that's not a tragedy. It's a triumph. This version of you, the one still standing, the one with quieter eyes but deeper wisdom, this is who you were always becoming. The loss didn't derail your path. It refined it. You're not the abandoned one. You're not the forgotten one. You're not the cursed one. You're the called one, and your calling, it was forged in fire. You don't need 1,000 people around you to confirm it. You don't need applause. You don't need closure from those who couldn't handle your truth. You just need to keep walking, keep breathing, keep showing up for yourself, for your purpose, for the lives you're meant to impact. Because someone out there is watching you right now, silently, wondering how you survived. And when they see your light, they'll remember they can rise too. There comes a moment in every chosen one's life when the fog finally lifts. Not all at once, no. Healing isn't that generous. It clears like a slow sunrise, a golden light creeping through the cracks of what used to feel like permanent darkness. And as it rises, something wild begins to awaken within you, something ancient, sacred, and deeply divine. You remember who you are, not just the version of you that loved and lost, not just the one who wept in silence when no one understood, not just the soul carrying invisible wounds no one could see. You remember the truth of who you've always been. You are not here to live a life of quiet, pain, and polite suffering. You are here to transform. You are here to rise. You are here to become the very thing your old world couldn't contain. And that means walking forward, not as the broken, grieving one anymore, but as a living testimony that death, loss, and abandonment could not bury your light. Because here's the final truth: most chosen ones don't realize until much later. You were always meant to walk alone, not forever, but for a time, long enough to be emptied, long enough to unlearn who the world told you to be, long enough to hear your own voice again beneath the noise. That season of solitude, it wasn't punishment, it was consecration. It was God separating you, not to destroy you, but to sanctify you. You weren't losing people randomly. You weren't cursed. You weren't abandoned by accident. You were being cleansed because your next season couldn't be built on shallow attachments. It couldn't carry the weight of codependency, fear, or unresolved grief. It needed something stronger, something unshakable. It needed you, healed, anchored, awakened. That's why it felt like your world kept crumbling. It wasn't cruelty, it was clarity. You couldn't take everyone with you. You couldn't explain your evolution to people who were committed to misunderstanding it. You couldn't drag your past into a future that demanded your full presence. And so, the universe cleared the path. It stripped away the noise. It removed what couldn't grow. It silenced the echoes until only one thing remained: your soul, naked, honest, unfiltered, and finally ready to be seen, not by the world, but by you. And that's when the real power began to emerge. Not the loud kind, not the performance, but the quiet, sacred kind. The kind that doesn't need to announce itself. The kind that walks into a room and shifts the energy without a single word. The kind that draws others not because you're desperate to be loved, but because you've become love itself. This is what chosen ones are made of: not ego, not ambition, but depth, truth, resilience. Forged through fire, you've tasted loss deeply, bitterly, and unfairly. But you've also tasted awakening, and now, every scar has become a map, every tear a baptism, every lonely night a classroom where God whispered secrets into your soul that no one else was allowed to hear. You are not ordinary, never have been. Your pain was not random. Your isolation was not coincidence. Your longing wasn't weakness. It was your spirit remembering its assignment. That's why nothing ever quite fit. That's why you always felt like you were born for something more. That's why even love sometimes felt incomplete, because you weren't made to settle for comfort. You were made to become a conduit of transformation, and that requires loss. It requires space. It requires seasons where you are emptied, not to break you, but to make you available. Available to divine instruction, available to truth, available to the people who are waiting for the light only you can carry. Because somewhere, right now, there is a soul on the edge of giving up. They've lost someone too. They've questioned their worth. They've cried into pillows and prayed prayers that felt like they vanished into the void. They're drowning in the silence you once knew so intimately. And when they find your voice, your story, your essence, they will realize they are not alone. They will remember that they too are chosen, not because you preached at them, not because you had all the answers, but because you lived, because you kept breathing when it hurt, because you kept showing up, even when it was easier to disappear, because you let go, not with bitterness, but with reverence, because you turned your pain into wisdom, and that is what chosen ones do. They take what the world says is too much, too painful, too broken, too strange, and they alchemize it into gold. You are gold now, refined, tested, holy, and yes, there will still be moments when the grief returns. There will be birthdays and anniversaries, songs that bring back memories, dreams where they visit you just for a moment. Let the sadness rise when it needs to. Let it pass like a sacred wave, not to drown you, but to remind you of how far you've come, because look at you now. You're no longer stuck in the story of what you lost. You are writing the story of who you became after the survivor, the mystic, the leader, the healer, and above all else, the embodiment of divine purpose. So stand tall, chosen one, not because you have all the answers, but because you have all the scars. Wear them with pride. Let them speak for you. And when the world asks how you're still standing, let them hear the quiet roar in your spirit say, because I was never alone, even in the loss, even in the silence. Even when I thought it was over, the light within me never went out. If this message stirred something deep in your spirit, if it reminded you of your strength, your calling, your purpose, then it's time to share it. There is someone out there drowning in the same storm you survived. Let this be the lifeline. They didn't know they needed hit block. If you've ever felt alone after losing someone you loved, subscribe for more powerful soul awakening truths for chosen ones like you, and share this video with someone who needs to hear. You are not alone, you are chosen, you are sacred, you are whole, you are becoming, and the best is still unfolding.